Hannah thought she married the love of her life, but Mark was hiding a secret darker than she could ever imagine. What began as a perfect marriage would spiral into betrayal, organized crime, and a tragic ending that no one saw coming. Hannah never thought her life would turn into a nightmare. To everyone around her, she had the kind of marriage people envied: a cozy home in the quiet suburbs, a husband who provided, and a life that looked clean and predictable from the outside. Mark was the steady one, the dependable one, the man with the plan. He wasn't flashy, not overly charming, but he was solid, and that's what drew Hannah to him. After years of relationships that felt like emotional roller coasters, Mark felt like peace. He didn't make dramatic promises or wild gestures, but he was consistent, responsible, and kind. That was enough for Hannah. They built a life together piece by piece, one quiet decision at a time. Mark worked in finance, or at least that was what he said. He'd never been specific, but Hannah trusted that vague answer. Finance explained the nice car, the weekend trips, the steady stream of packages arriving at the door. It explained the expensive wristwatch he wore and the way he sometimes disappeared for entire weekends on business trips. Looking back, there were so many signs that should have told her something was off. But when you love someone, you don't see the signs. You explain them away. You trust. Trust was how Hannah was raised. Loyalty, commitment. She never thought she'd need to doubt her husband. The early years of their marriage were calm, almost boring in the best way possible. Work during the week, barbecues with friends on weekends, occasional vacations when schedules allowed. Hannah often caught herself feeling grateful that life wasn't filled with chaos or uncertainty. She admired other couples who seemed to thrive on wild passion, but she was content with steady companionship. Mark always made sure she had everything she needed. Birthday presents were always thoughtful. Anniversary gifts came with handwritten notes that made her feel appreciated. Friends would say things like, "You're lucky, Hannah. Guys like that don't come around often." And she believed it. Why wouldn't she? But even perfect things can have cracks hidden beneath the surface. And the first tiny fracture came one evening over dinner when Mark's phone buzzed with a message, and Hannah noticed his hand tremble as he silenced it. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but for a brief second, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not the nervousness of someone caught sending flirty messages to another woman. This was different. It was deeper, sharper. Like someone who had just been reminded of something he didn't want to face. Hannah brushed it off at the time, convincing herself it was probably just work stress, maybe a demanding client or a bad market downturn. But that small moment planted something inside her, curiosity mixed with unease. Over the next few months it grew, slowly turning into suspicion, but never fully forming into action. Love kept her blind. Loyalty kept her silent. Hannah didn't know it yet, but the life she thought was safe was already falling apart. The perfect marriage was only perfect from the outside. On the inside, a storm was building. The unraveling of Hannah's world began with something small, something so ordinary it almost seemed harmless. A letter. It wasn't even addressed by hand, just a plain envelope with Mark's name typed neatly across the front. No return address, no markings to suggest importance, just an anonymous piece of mail on an ordinary weekday. If curiosity hadn't gotten the better of her, maybe she could have stayed blissfully unaware a little longer. But that's not how life works. One choice, one moment of weakness, and everything starts to crack open. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper filled with numbers, names, and what looked like codes or account details. The words didn't make sense, but there were patterns, rows of transactions, amounts of money, strange terms she couldn't place. At the very bottom, almost like a signature, was a single word that stood out from the rest: shipment. Hannah didn't know what it meant, but she knew it didn't belong in a letter to a man who supposedly worked in finance. It didn't make sense. The confusion sat in her chest like a stone, and no matter how she tried to explain it away, it wouldn't go away. Days later, searching for something innocent like receipts in Mark's gym bag, she found the burner phone. It was small, old, and cheap, nothing like the sleek smartphone Mark carried around every day. She hesitated before turning it on, but curiosity won again. When the screen lit up, her heart dropped. The messages were short and coded, filled with dates, numbers, locations, and initials she didn't recognize. One message read, "Final delivery confirmed. Funds will be processed by next week. No mistakes this time." This wasn't finance. This was something darker, something dangerous. Hannah could feel it in her bones. Her mind started replaying the past few years with fresh eyes. The late nights, the unexplained trips, the cash withdrawals that didn't fit with their lifestyle. She remembered times Mark had come home jumpy, irritable, distracted. She had written it all off as the stress of providing for their future. Now she wondered what future they were even building together. As the weight of the discovery settled in, panic took over. Who were these people messaging him? What was being shipped? Why was there so much money moving around in secret? It was more than she could process, but something inside her shifted that day. Love began to crumble under the weight of fear. Unable to confront Mark directly, Hannah did what anyone would do. She started digging. Old receipts, hidden folders on his laptop, spare keys to places she didn't recognize. The more she looked, the more she found, and each discovery was worse than the last. Hidden within bank statements were transactions that didn't lead to normal purchases. Payments to anonymous accounts, large sums moved offshore, cryptic memos attached to transfers. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional, planned, professional. What terrified her most wasn't just that Mark was hiding something. It was how good he was at it. The man she trusted had been living two lives, and she didn't even know the person standing next to her anymore. Fear became a constant companion for Hannah. Every sound in the house felt sharper. Every glance from Mark carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. She moved through her days like a ghost, pretending everything was normal, but inside, she was unraveling. The silence between them grew heavier, stretched out by the unspoken truth she now carried. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to break the whole thing wide open, but something deeper held her back, fear of what she might unleash if she did. It wasn't just about Mark anymore. Whoever he was involved with wasn't small time. This wasn't about sneaking a few dollars here or there or helping some old friend with shady business. This was organized, structured. Every document she found suggested a level of professionalism that scared her more than the crime itself. These people didn't make mistakes. And people who got in the way didn't just walk away. At first, Hannah told herself she could just ignore it, keep her head down, and hope that somehow it would all pass. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Every late-night meeting Mark left for, every anxious glance at his phone, every excuse that didn't quite make sense, it was all piling up like a slow-moving avalanche, impossible to stop. The weight of the situation pressed down harder when she accidentally stumbled upon a folder hidden behind cleaning supplies in the back of their hallway closet. Inside were documents that didn't just suggest illegal activity, they confirmed it. Contracts with initials instead of names, coded payment plans, and horrifyingly, a list of individuals connected to the organization. Some names were scratched out in red ink. Hannah didn't need to be told what that likely meant. These weren't just partners in crime. These were liabilities being removed. She could barely sleep after that discovery. Every creak of the house at night made her flinch. Every car that slowed outside their home felt like a potential threat. Mark seemed tense, too, like someone who knew he was living on borrowed time. His smiles felt thinner, his touches colder. The warmth that once filled their home was gone, replaced by something sharp and electric, a silent countdown neither of them acknowledged out loud. Hannah started rehearsing possible outcomes in her mind. Could she run? Where would she go? Who could she trust? The thought of going to the police terrified her almost as much as staying. If Mark found out she was planning to expose him, she wasn't sure what he'd be capable of. Love had become something twisted and fragile, holding together a life she barely recognized anymore. But doing nothing didn't feel like an option either. She felt trapped between two choices, both leading toward disaster. The man she married was no longer her husband, at least not the version of him she thought she knew. Instead, she was living with a stranger wearing the skin of the man she loved, and she was running out of time to decide what to do about it. Hannah finally understood that silence was no longer safety. The weight of what she knew was suffocating, and pretending everything was fine only made it worse. Every instinct told her to run, but deep down she knew she couldn't escape this alone. The decision to contact the authorities didn't come lightly. It came after long nights of staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, imagining every terrible scenario possible. But it was the crossed out names on that hidden list that finally pushed her over the edge. If others had been removed because they were liabilities, what would happen to her once Mark realized she knew the truth? With careful planning, she bought a cheap phone with cash from a store across town, making sure she wasn't followed. She researched contact numbers for federal agencies, reading every article she could find about witness protection and confidential informants. When she finally made the call, her voice shook, but she pushed through. She gave them no names yet, only hints, just enough to make them listen. They responded cautiously, but with clear interest. They wanted evidence, real proof, before they could offer protection. So Hannah became a spy in her own home. Each day she played the role of the dutiful wife, smiling when expected, asking casual questions to cover her tracks, pretending not to notice the late nights and strange phone calls. But when Mark was gone, she got to work. She photographed documents, copied down account numbers, even managed to record fragments of conversations Mark had in the garage late at night. Every step she took felt like walking across broken glass, and the fear of discovery was constant. Her paranoia grew with every passing day. She started checking door locks twice, sometimes 3 times, terrified that someone might slip in while she slept. Cars parked on the street made her heart race. Even friendly neighbors waving hello seemed suspicious. Mark's behavior shifted, too. He became restless, more on edge than ever before. His temper, once rare, began surfacing in sharp, short bursts. He was feeling it, too, the walls closing in, the growing sense that their perfect world was built on something rotten and unstable. Hannah thought she was being careful, but the truth was, she underestimated Mark. For all her secret work, she didn't realize that Mark had been keeping secrets of his own. There were small cameras in places she'd never checked. Hidden apps on his phone monitored activity in the house. He had installed software that recorded her internet history. The very tools she thought she was using to protect herself were betraying her. It all became clear to him one night when he replayed one of her secret conversations with the investigator. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices or sudden violence. Just a shift. Mark's eyes, once familiar and kind, were now unreadable. He didn't need to say anything. Hannah could feel it in her bones. The facade had broken, the masks were off, and now only one thing was certain. There was no way both of them were getting out of this alive. The final moments of Hannah's life unfolded slowly, like watching a glass fall from a table in slow motion, fully aware of the inevitable crash, but powerless to stop it. The house that once felt like a safe haven now carried a different kind of silence, one that felt like the world was holding its breath before something terrible happened. The small details stood out in sharp focus, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the weight of the phone in her hand with that one final message glowing on the screen. We're ready to move in. Help was moments away, but not fast enough. Mark stood across the room holding the burner phone she thought she'd hidden perfectly, his expression empty, not angry, not sad, just cold. The man she had loved, trusted, and built her life with was gone, replaced by someone capable of anything. There were no words exchanged, no desperate pleas or explanations. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in silence over the past weeks. This was the result of all the choices made by both of them, by Mark's lies and by Hannah's desperate attempt to do the right thing. Outside, the faint sound of distant sirens echoed through the quiet streets, growing closer. But inside the house, time had slowed. Hannah's heart pounded as she weighed her final options. She thought of running, but she was too far from the door, too exposed. She thought of fighting, but there was nothing within reach that could help her. She wasn't prepared for this moment, even though she'd imagined it 100 different ways in her head. The reality was colder, sharper, more terrifying than any nightmare she'd rehearsed alone at night. What Mark did next wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of thing that would alert the neighbors or break windows. It was clinical, practiced, quiet, like someone following orders, even if those orders only existed in his own twisted logic. The tragedy of it all was how familiar the space around them felt, as though everyday life should have been continuing, as though this was just another evening spent together in their home. By the time the federal agents stormed through the door, it was too late. The scene they found was one of stillness, not chaos. Mark didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed calm, almost relieved. Whatever double life he'd been leading, whatever weight he'd been carrying, it was over now, in the most horrific way possible. The headlines in the following weeks painted a story of betrayal, crime, and a marriage destroyed from the inside out. But the headlines didn't tell the whole truth. They didn't capture the fear Hannah lived with, the impossible choices she had faced, or the quiet courage it took to stand up against something so much bigger than herself. In the end, Hannah's story became just another quiet tragedy buried beneath headlines and court cases, a life stolen not by strangers, but by the one person she trusted most.